Initially, designers placed the spawn locations for common infected mobs in each map. However, it became obvious after a few playthroughs that skilled survivors knew exactly where each of these were, killing the atmosphere of anticipation and constant danger. To address this, we tried creating sets of these mob generators and randomizing which sets were active for a given session. This helped somewhat, but ultimately it meant that experienced survivor teams would just have to check a few more known locations. Since a primary design goal of Left 4 Dead was to create an experience that could be replayed indefinitely, we needed a new approach. We decided to go for the ideal but riskier solution, a completely procedural approach that would determine where to create mobs on the fly as the team was playing. Although it took longer to build this system, in the end it worked better than we even hoped. Not only were experienced teams no longer able to expect where mobs would hit, but the process of populating maps with enemies was hugely simplified. What used to take weeks of painful iteration and constant updating as maps were changed became a 5-minute process that was much more tolerant of map changes and actually played better. It was so successful, in fact, that we can't imagine building Left 4 Dead without a system for this kind of procedural content. We later expanded this system to add wandering zombies to the environments to increase the survivors' tactical choices and add additional variety to the game experience. Once this design decision was made, these wanderers were added to every map in the game with just an afternoon's worth of code from a single programmer. We play-tested the idea that very same day.
Network bandwidth usage when playing Left 4 Dead is a huge concern. We're constantly looking for ways to reduce how much data the server needs to send to each of the players. In most of our multiplayer games, we're only concerned with other players and their projectiles and weapons. But in Left 4 Dead, we must update not only the behavior of other players, but those of a horde of infected. In the hospital campaign, a lot of the surfaces are flat, such as halls and roadways. By making sure the infected only send their height when it changes, instead of giving complete position updates, we shaved almost 10% of the bandwidth from the server.
The process behind designing Zoe's character wasn't as straightforward as the other three. Developing a young female in a zombie apocalypse isn't easy with a backstory like hers. She had to be attractive and worn down at the same time. She needed to be tough and able to hold her own, even though she's occasionally terrified. Her readability was also something we had to take into consideration. A bright red jacket solved the problem. It pops out amongst the gritty, desaturated zombies and the dark, subdued environment. As far as the rest of her appearance, there was a little bit of back and forth as her character came into focus through iteration. Finally, we were certain that the character model met our goals, and Zoe unfolded into an everyday young woman who everyone can relate to.
Ready?
Our first maps created specifically for the game were giant non-linear city sections. The idea was that the survivor team would have to find their way through the zombie-infested city. Playtesting quickly revealed that keeping track of your teammates and fending off the hordes of zombies completely consumed players' attention. Adding on-the-fly discussions of which way to go were slow and frustrating. More importantly, however, was that the teams quickly found their favorite route and tended to always run the same way every time, minimizing their on-the-fly decisions. By paring down the city to a representative and fairly linear route, we could better spend our limited resources making that area highly detailed.
Originally, the survivor's path forced them through a gas station convenience store and out by these pumps. Due to the path, many players accidentally shot the pumps from close proximity, leading to a premature and seemingly unfair end to their survivor experience. Through a cycle of playtesting and iteration, we ultimately arrived at this layout, which preserved both the life of the player and the spectacle of the gas station detonating.
This loading dock was another arena that we designated for our mini-finale. This time, instead of locking the survivors in a defensive position, we decided to have them ride the lift up to a rooftop encounter with the Horde.
Based on the success of procedurally populating the world with wanderers and mobs, we decided to try to guarantee a consistent dramatic experience for the survivors. Through playtesting, we observed sessions where some survivor teams would occasionally get into a downward spiral of being overwhelmed to the point that they were never able to regroup and get ahead. This was partially due to some poor choices of the survivor players in varying skill levels, but also due to the luck of the draw with the procedural population system. A random streak of bad dice rolls would either be incredibly exciting for some teams or a death sentence for others. To address this, we created a system that tracks each survivor's stress level by watching for events like how much damage are you taking, how many zombies have you killed near you, and so on. If a survivor's stress level gets too high, the system will step in and forcibly throttle back the zombie population system to make sure the team gets a break every now and then. These breaks are critical for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is battle fatigue. Constant fighting and gunfire is tiring. Secondly, the team needs an end to these skirmishes along the way to give them a chance to regroup, heal, and reassess. Lastly, these big exciting battles are only exciting if there are also periods of quiet, creepy, tension, and anticipation to contrast them against. This dramatic pacing is really critical to creating a fun experience. Once this system was in place, we realized we had all this useful information on how the survivor team is actually doing. From a dramatic standpoint, ideally we want to see the survivor team just make it into the next checkpoint, limping in, being chased by the Horde, so they can celebrate when the door closes and they yell, "We made it."
Come on, this way!
One film technique we brought to Left 4 Dead was the idea of grain. Film grain is most apparent in dark scenes, which made it an attractive visual effect for our game. Grain does a good job of implying detail in darkness, adding grittiness and texture. However, we found in playtesting that if we applied grain uniformly, people would quickly tire of the effect. We hit upon a method for dynamically varying the grain effect based on light level. Scenes range from grainy texture in darkness and shadows to no grain at all in the brightest spots.
Left 4 Dead was created with the goal of being replayable. This goal causes a problem for writing, where characters will have the same speech opportunity multiple times over a single session. So we have to avoid having the speech become repetitive. We do that in multiple ways. One is to have almost all the speech have a random element to when it plays. This stops the player from being able to tune out the speech because it is expected for a certain action. We successfully tested this on Team Fortress 2 and have expanded on that system. In Left 4 Dead, not only does the initial speech have a random element, but we also have follow-up lines that may or may not play after the initial line, randomizing the speech opportunity further. We also limit how often some lines play.
No matter how witty or funny a line is, you're sick of it the 100th time you hear it in an hour-long play session. To address this, our vocalization system allows us to control the rarity of individual lines or even complete speech opportunities. For instance, a speech opportunity may only fire if you are playing the character Bill and Zoe is healing you and she has just healed you a few minutes earlier. This type of randomization based on combination of criteria help make the speech seem natural and avoid having the player hear it too often.
Ammo here!
Reloading!
For much of the development of Left 4 Dead, Versus mode was the default and only mode. Balance problems eventually forced us to make it a separate game type. The problem was that if we balanced it to provide the survivors a reasonable chance of escape, the experience was a long and frustrating one for the player zombies. Changes that were necessary to make the player zombie experience satisfying also served to make the experience dramatically harder for the survivors. Separating Versus mode allowed us to break out of this dilemma. Rather than aiming for a 50-50 shot at the survivors escaping, now we're aiming for a shorter, more intense experience where the survivors are unlikely to make it to the end. The goal is simply to get further than the other team did. It's more fun for the zombies, and your reward for having a harder time as the survivors is that you get to switch teams after you're slaughtered and do the same to them.
Hold on, let me patch you up.
Thanks.
Sure.
This ladder, from day one, has always been a really exciting place in the campaign, because it forces the team to separate a bit, and players can't shoot while they're on the ladder. If a team's in great shape, they just fly through this area. But if the team is really hurting, everyone will stop and look at each other to see who has the most health. That guy will generally go up first, because chances are there's going to be infected up there. It's not always the case, but often enough that whoever goes up first is going to take a bit of a beating.
Gotta get to the hospital.
The witch is much rarer than the boomer, and her penalty is much more severe. Basically, if you shoot the witch, you will likely die. The witch has two functions. One is to provide an exception to the rule of shoot everything that moves. The primary function of the witch, however, is to force a change of pace on the survivor team. Ideally, discovering a witch near your path will result in the team going into stealth mode, shutting off their flashlights and walking carefully around her as to not disturb her. This is a large departure from the intense and loud pace of normal gameplay. In earlier versions of the witch's behavior, she was far more dangerous. Once she was set off, she went berserk and attacked all of the survivors until she was killed. This proved to be too harsh, particularly for teams of new players. One stray bullet could wake the witch and she would slay the entire team, ending the game. Now she limits her wrath to the survivor who harassed her. If she successfully kills that player, she retreats from the scene entirely.
I'm with you.
Take this. I might need these pills. Lock the door! That was good.